also for the heart of what the Global Innovation Hub entails. We have a very exciting chat ahead and a great, amazing set of speakers. My name is Martin Wainstein. I am the founder and executive director of the Open Earth Foundation. We are an open source, big picture innovation lab and venture studio. We put out big ideas and design systems around them. And we're a proud and honored core partner to the UN Global Innovation Hub. It's been really a pleasure to be part of this journey. So I'll give also a little bit of context around the UN Global Innovation Hub of where I think this panel can go. And we're going to have a chat around a very important topic, particularly when we think about the intersection of digital technology and thinking beyond traditional financial systems and new tools that we have at hand to also step into the art of the possible and how do we finance change. One of the key things about the UN Global Innovation Hub is it tries to flip the switch between trying to get very key strategic actors like cities to meet climate targets and rather to meet core human needs. And how do we match cities and core human needs with solutions, and how do we finance that? So almost like a three-sided marketplace that connects these three actors, demand actors such as cities, solution providers, and finance to connect and drive into projects on the ground. As part of that, in the urban space, digital environmental assets are key, and we're going to explore what they are, how do we understand them now, what has happened over the last couple of years in the space. Often when we think about digital environmental assets, lately we think about carbon credits and tokenized carbon credits. I've heard this term, particularly over the last year, around that, but it's a lot more than that. In the case of the urban context, renewable energy certificates are key. At the heart of the Paris Agreement, mitigation outcomes can be represented as digital environmental assets. The second topic, of course, is programmable money. And when we think about programmable money, we think about the process of digitization. And a lot of what is empowered around digitization and contracting through decentralization. And then finally, the future of climate finance is how do all these topics come together? I'll give a quick introduction to our amazing panelists today, but I also give you some space to give a little bit of context of what you bring into this multi-flavor topic, and I would propose that we think about this topic from essentially sort of two angles, or three. We have to look at what is the value that we want to capture, what are the building blocks, so that may entail verification systems, ways to track a mitigation, ways to tokenize value. How do we think about DEAs, digital environmental assets, as building blocks? And then the second part, mostly around applications. What can we do? What do we think about when we think about programmable money? And also keeping in mind this context of meeting core human needs in the climate age, opportunities in the urban space, but also the role that nature-based solutions have. So we have the ability to be able to move around these topics. From here out, we have Michael Sheren. He's from MVGX at Singapore, but also has been part of the Bank of England for almost 10 years. So having a central banker in the room is always important, particularly as we think about the future of money and how do we understand our reserves. So I'm very excited. Thank you so much, Michael, for being here. Eva Gladek from Metabolic. Eva is a total expert on city and systems transformation, as well as collective partnerships. Next, Yannis Ioannidis. This is already back-to-back sessions for Yannis. I joke that we have to build a bed for Yannis we are going to keep him here and just like pick his brain constantly. An amazing talent on data and federated learning, different ways of computational power that we have today that are so critical in the topic of finance. Rob Allen, thank you also so much for coming from the HBAR Foundation. HBAR is one of what we understand as the layer one world of distributed ledger technologies, not a blockchain per se, and has a lot of history around the finance space and a lot of topics like central bank digital currencies. We have, just to remind you, almost 500 people online that are really excited about this topic. Just checking in with a lot of excitement from the world on hearing around this. And we also have Phoebe Koundouri, who will be joining us soon. Phoebe has also been one of our amazing talents that we've retained here. She brings an amazing perspective also around SDGs, taxonomies, and how do we think about the analytics part of finance. Again, let's just give a quick round of applause to our panelists. Really honored to have you here. And I'll start with that. Like, I would love for you to give a quick context of where you come into this discussion when you think about the building blocks for the future of finance. What do you think about digital environmental assets? What is the core value that we need to represent? What are exciting tools that we need to be aware of? And with that, I think that's more than enough to take it away. Maybe we'll start with you, Michael. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. A great collection of other panelists. So, I was in a central bank for over 10 years, and we had roughly 66 billion of gold coins in our basement, the Bank of England. And by the way, none of it's ours. Gordon Brown sold all of the British gold, so we were just keeping it on hold for everyone else. But that's an interesting way to think about what's value is. What do we value? And so we've got sitting in the basement 66 billion of gold. We certainly have our own fiat currency, but it's also often represented in a electronic phase. Because people talk about digital currencies. We've already got an electronic system already. But what creates value? And I guess to give a little context, when I came into the BOE, I came in the same time as Mark Carney, and we viewed that threats to nature and to the earth were going to be threats to financial stability, period. And that was something that needed to get into the global financial system. So at the time, Mark was the head of the FSB and the head of the Bank of England. So we basically kicked that ball into the G20. And I had the great honor of representing the United Kingdom as a co-chair with Dr. Mao Jun of China as the first chairpeople of the Sustainable Finance Study Group, which was the first time anything nature-based ended up in the finance track of the G20. And by the way, if you've ever heard the golden rule, whoever has the gold makes the rule. And again, I'm keep going around value. That's the track in the G20. That's the track of the central bankers and the ministries of finance. They finance the environmental ministries and everyone else. So I keep coming back to value. So we've spent a lot of time in the G20, a lot of time in the BOE, trying to understand where value is created, not just in our systems, but also where the threats to it are. Now, also, the BOE spent a lot of time trying to put value on nature, and we've done some reports. So has the Dutch Central Bank and the De Kupta report. So central banks are also starting to understand nature has real value. Carbon, we already figured out, and carbon is moving very quickly into a system where it's going to be very close to a currency. Basically, being able to take a ton of absorbed or sequestered carbon and being able to create a forward pricing curve with financial service architecture, documentation. I just came out of a meeting this morning how we're trying to accelerate that. To be quite honest, not to get very boring, but we're on financial topics and things, but they're going to be derivatives. And you need ISDA documentation if you want to trade a derivative in the marketplace. And all of this actually matters for nature as well. I'm going to quickly hand off, but again, I want to talk about value one more time, because the southern part of the world has value far greater than large elements of the northern part. And we start thinking about and putting prices on water, on trees, on biodiversity. We find, where does that sit? I'm doing a lot of work out of Asia, and I say that my next door neighbor, Indonesia, is the left lung of the world, and obviously Brazil's the right. And Africa, absolutely critical. And we need their natural capital as a system-based world more than we need that 66 billion we've got sitting in the basement of the Bank of England. So how do we, and I'm hoping this discussion today, at least from a central banker's point of view, on how do we start tokenizing, how do we start building systems that actually create not only the value, but transfer that value around the world. When we get our very smart content people and our tech people in, we'll do that, and then maybe I'll come back in and talk a little bit how that can be plugged into the global system. So with that, I'll hand off to my esteemed colleague over here at Metabolic.
Thank you so much. So my name is Eva Gladek. I'm the founder and CEO of Metabolic, which is a systems change agency based out of Amsterdam with one mission, which is to transition the global economy to a fundamentally sustainable state. So as Martine already mentioned, we work a lot with developing transition plans for cities, but we also work with large corporations on developing their sustainability strategies. So for example, we worked with Pepsi recently on developing their regenerative agriculture strategy, etc. So I'm here from a very different perspective than I think my fellow panelists, because I'm more on the side of the application on the content side of how can we really use digital environmental assets and nature-based currencies to solve the problems that I'm seeing on the ground in my daily work and in the daily work of my teams. One of the biggest challenges that we encounter is we develop these great strategies for cities and for companies that are really clear from a technical perspective of how they can decarbonize, how they can move toward regenerative agriculture, but finance is always in the way, because a lot of these different nature and these different environmental services that are created are not monetized, they're not counted on the balance sheet. And it's actually often a risk for organizations to start monetizing those things currently when in a situation where they can't get value for those, because suddenly they're on the hook for then being able, having to pay for certain things that they're not going to be able to get returns for. So there, we've seen this certain times where we've been asked to do an evaluation of all the different costs according to different natural and social capitals within an entire value chain, but then the organization has said, actually, we don't want to know because that's going to put us at legal liability. So I think a large part of this discussion is around, nature is the new gold, actually. We know that we rely on it for our lives, but it's not easily movable, it's not easily tradable, it's not easily, it basically doesn't have any of the characteristics that money has. So tokenizing natural assets will allow for that exchange of value and resources to facilitate and speed up the process of these sustainable transitions. There are some moral questions that I do want to flag around assigning monetary values to nature, and I think that there are really interesting solutions in this space where you can trade like for like. Instead of saying, okay, we bring everything down to a common financial denominator, even on a global scale, you can, let's say, create a pool of carbon assets that are, carbon for carbon, rather than carbon to money and then to carbon. And that's something that I'm personally interested in, because what is the value of a human life, or the value of the existence of tigers, right? So, but anyway, I think we will get into some of these topics.
Thank you very much. If Phoebe Koundouri had come back, I think she would take what you said very well and move, because she has done a lot of work in modeling of nature and monetizing it and so on and so forth. But as you can see, I'm not Phoebe Koundouri. I'm Yannis Ioannidis, and I'm a purely digital person. So all I know is digital technologies, and especially data management, data analysis. And data is a key to everything that we discuss throughout the value chain. We need data, and we need to process it and analyze it and learn from it, come up with the right models in order then to do the right financing and so on. And we need it throughout the value chains of economy, but also there is a data value chain, because the way you acquire the data has particular technologies in place, and then you wait to wrangle it, prepare it, and so on. Then you model it, analyze it, and eventually you want to make sense out of it. So this monetization has to take into account how do you deal with data. And decentralized technologies, but by the nature of a lot of the instruments that have been developed, and central banks don't quite like what is happening, and I'm with them partly, but Martin, I don't know if we'll go into that later, but you need whatever you need, even if it is the current digital monetization that is happening or what is going to replace it, it has to be decentralized. A lot of investment has happened everywhere. This distributed, decentralized infrastructure has to be used both for computation but also for for the extraction and exchange of whatever monetary instruments we will have. And the word, that the term that and the technology that is being used and is prevalent now is blockchain. Maybe we'll still remember it in 5 years, maybe not, but we need a mechanism like blockchain for accountability, for transparency, and being decentralized, having the responsibility of this accountability not in the hands of a few trusted partners, but sometimes maybe not necessarily thinking of the globe as a whole, is key. And if you want to bring together data from multiple sources in a federation of data, in a federation of computational infrastructure, you need to use federated technologies. And all this data, someone will say, I'm not going to share my data with you. Fair enough. Technology comes in to come up with ways, cryptology, privacy-preserving ways, so that you can still bring your data next to someone else in a way to come up with the right computations, to give you the right results for all analysis without me knowing your data and you knowing my data. And this is something that us technologists have worked on a lot for the past 20 years. We have very mature technology. But still not at the level of scalability that we need for what we have. So we have our work cut out for us to come up with secure multi-party computations, differential privacy and other technologies to ensure that all the stakeholders can share the data and come up with the right financing, the right monitoring afterwards that will give us transparency. Last term, open. Lots of data have to be private, but let's be as open as possible, as private or as closed as necessary. I mean, and I asked you yesterday, Martin's organization is Open Earth. Openness is a key for us to bring Earth and our humanity to the next level. And open data has a big role to play to that.
Welcome, Phoebe. I'm going to sit like this now because you're here, Phoebe. My name is Rob Allen. I work for an organization called the HBAR Foundation. I'm delighted to be on this panel. I mean, the words that are already being used around tokenization, openness, trust, suggests that we kind of understand what decentralization is about. The HBAR Foundation was created to provide, as a not-for-profit, to provide grant funding into the ecosystem for the development and commercialization of the Hedera hashgraph distributed ledger technology. It's not a blockchain, but it's similar to a blockchain, as you said. There are challenges with blockchains that make them not a good choice for some applications in the environmental space, not just because of proof of work, but for scaling or decentralization or security issues. Hedera has none of those issues. Within the foundation, we've got a number of strategic pillars, and one of them is our Sustainable Impact Fund. Hedera is provably carbon negative. We offset the very small impact that network has. And we believe that's really important if you're building sustainability solutions, not to be carrying a lot of carbon debt before you even make a positive impact. Our Sustainable Impact Fund was announced earlier in this year as $100 million for this year to meet our mission. And our mission is actually to bring the balance sheet of the planet to the public ledger. What that really means is that we are looking to tokenize natural assets. We're putting them on a public ledger, the Hedera ledger, and we're going to be encouraging the solutions of the world to build in a way that, like never before, creates trust and transparency around these new types of new classes of natural asset. We're focusing on 5 key areas: the areas of bringing accountability to climate finance, around scaling verification and validation methods, we'll let the youths of the world have their
Gotta have the youth.
cool. Creating open source methodologies, that's really important. The methodologies that encapsulate the credits, both carbon and all other types of credit that we'll be talking about today, no doubt. In order to move the needle, in order to create a step change in terms of impact, open source is key. Lowering the barrier to entry, enabling projects, whether they be mangrove renewal or agricultural regeneration, reforestation, biodiversity projects, or just pure renewable energy credits. All of these things are very diverse, but to have open source methodologies enables the projects that are implementing in this space really easily to onboard. And finally, and the other part of the equation, two things. Finally, the liquidity in these markets is really key. Once we tokenize the assets, we need to create liquidity. We need to reduce friction in the markets. We need to be able to match supply and demand. We need to be able to do predictive modeling in order to make markets around these tokens. And then we need to ensure that the demand side is matched to the supply side in a way that is equitable, and that the finance flows into the projects in a way that turns the flywheel even faster and brings on board more projects. So that's a lot of words. We're doing a lot. Our technology is called Guardian. It's an open source technology stack which tokenizes every type of environmental project. And then we've made a number of announcements this week in terms of the AI-driven marketplace called Tolem, and all sorts of other cool technology around that ecosystem. It is an ecosystem play, right? This is all open source to allow any organization to come into the ecosystem, to compete, to collaborate, and to drive change.
Hello. You want to ask me something?
No, thank you, Phoebe. Like, great to have you. Just giving context, your background. We were saying a little bit of what do we think about the building blocks of next level finance, from value to what do we understand as digital environment assets. And I know you bring great perspectives to understanding what is what in the whole spectrum of sustainability. And so we're just doing a quick round. It would be great to have your context.
Well, I think at this point in time that we have quite a substantial amount of data, geospatial data coming from sensors, data coming from institute infrastructures. We are really in a position to have deep understanding of what is happening. So we are in a position to know where we are today, and we are in position to measure and quantify and even monetize the effects of the social and economic system on nature and the effects of degrading nature on the social and economic system. So we have the data, we have the science that articulates the effects between the three systems, the society, the economy, and nature. And we also have this big ability of the digital work to support the work of the socioeconomics, because it allows us to quantify and monetize natural capital. It allows us to quantify and monetize human capital. It allows us to quantify and monetize cultural capital, and at the same time allows meaningful integration of these forms of capital with financial capital. So at last, and probably the first time in the history of humankind, we are able to measure and monetize all capital that we need in order to make sensible decisions in terms of investments and in terms of asset management. We have the way to identify the optimal investments according to our only global agenda, the SDGs, and we can identify that by explicitly measuring cost and benefits of all forms of capital. Financial capital, natural capital, ecosystem-based, human capital, cultural capital, and social capital. So we have all the information we need. And we have digital tools that allow us to monitor and even digitally tag all this information. And this is exactly what is needed, and it is explicitly referred in the EU taxonomy in order to make us get on a sustainable economic development pathway. The taxonomy says that first I identify which are the investments that are gonna get better long terms, climate mitigation, adaptation, sustainable use of biodiversity, water, oceans, and circular economy. It also tells us that the big companies, the listed companies, and also the companies in regulated markets need to submit a sustainability report with very specific information, not the sustainability reports we've been following until today. And this information will be continuously assessed, monitored, and digitally tagged. And at the end of the day, it tells us that asset management should also integrate sustainability principles. And based on that, and to accelerate and facilitate the implementation of the EU taxonomy, the UN SDSN and the Alliance of Excellence of Innovation and Research on Sustainability that I lead have developed a digital tool that uses the open access data that you've heard about, calculates the SDG content and indexes, merge this with ESGs, and identifies the optimal pathways towards the sustainability transition. Please contact us to make available this tool, both with regards to identifying sustainable investments, but also with regards to optimal asset management portfolio. Thank you.
Thank you, Phoebe. And wow, I mean, hearing all the different perspectives, it feels like we are in an inflection point. Huge era of opportunity. In some sense, you've challenged us into rethinking what value is, and you've described some of the tools that we have to do that. You've talked about the challenge around gold as a really valuable or not very valuable, and the opportunity of nature, and you put it as nature as the new gold. You've also introduced the importance around value chain and what does that mean for corporations, probably all the stakeholders that have to be involved with that. I think, Yannis, you kind of frame a little bit of where data is a little bit of a new gold in some sense, where data is the feedstock to agree on value, and everyone sort of hints around that collective need to define that value. Rob, you sort of talk about some of the key infrastructure, and you already start introducing the concepts of what does that look like? Is it a blockchain? Is it not a blockchain? The role of DLTs, why open source is important, what are the new business models that are not just about the tools that we use, but more like the assets that we create with them. And Phoebe, I think you've walked us through, among other things, the whole spectrum of capital, right? So we're not just challenging value, we're challenging capital. Now, before we go to like sort of step of implement this, how do we turn this into applications that can help us meet our mandates under the 1.5 degree target go into implementation of projects on the ground, there is a common theme around decentralization. And I'm not surprised, because as we're challenging value and as we're creating new tools, participation is key, and openness and agreement around that. But there's also a lot of tension around the discussion around decentralization. When is it needed? What are the tools? Are blockchains good? Are blockchains bad? Yannis, I think that you have strong thoughts around blockchain, but it sounded that you were like leaning into it. I know that there's a lot of things that come when we talk about and a lot around the interoperability, because everyone's kind of popping up their own ledger and their blockchain, and we're going to put our assets here, and you're going to put your assets there. How do we think about this? How do the stakeholders that need to be part of that when a lot of these topics are very obscure? I'm putting it out, move into application level to see whoever, just feel free to share what I'm gonna change the mic. This is like oscillated back and forth. Yeah, what are the things that as we're going into this disruptive journey, we need to keep in mind? Anyone, feel free.
I've got the mic.
Okay.
Let's talk about blockchain. Okay, blockchain is a meme. It's a theme now. It's not any one thing, but it's a label. And I don't mind Hedera being called a blockchain, because it kind of makes things easy to kind of frame. The underlying technology is really important, because one blockchain is not the same as another. When you wake up in one morning and a blockchain has been turned off, or doesn't exist anymore, or the tokens have gone to zero, it doesn't provide you the kind of resilience that you expect of a global next generation internet, which is what blockchain or blockchains should be, decentralized internet. And what it really means to have a decentralized internet is the data or the assets on that are issued on that network have property rights. And the unit, the core unit here of digital assets is property rights. It's not on a centralized database somewhere, which is subject to hacking or a sysadmin finger fault or any other change that is out of your control. If you own something, you hold the keys, and that asset is on your wallet. So the tokens are on your wallet, whether it be a cryptocurrency, whether it be a stable coin, which is backed by some other form of more stable value, or a new type of currency, which might be nature-backed, or an asset which is non-fungible. And in a future where everything is tokenized, non-fungible tokens aren't pictures of bored monkeys. They're everything that is not a fungible token, i.e. everything that is not a cash-like or a cash-equivalent token. And that can be digital twins of whole smart cities. It could be in the metaverse. It could be digital twins of products that carry all the provenance of what's gone into to make them, because the data itself is trusted, because it's transparent and linked to that asset. It could be an environmental asset that has the metadata associated with it that combines the carbon from the project with the biodiversity impact and the water impact in a very much more complex relationship. And that is a non-fungible token too. So all of these things come down to the fact that you trust the network. You trust the network is still going to be there when you need the asset. And then you hold the keys for that asset. And then you can do, the genius of Bitcoin was that it removed intermediaries where they didn't add any value in the value chain. Doesn't mean that there shouldn't be intermediaries. It just means if they didn't add value, they shouldn't be there. And that's what blockchains are good for.
And in some ways, like just going back to the analogy of gold, you've got 66 billion on your basement in the Bank of England, and we needed technology to keep it safe. Technology is like the coffer, but it's now open and decentralized in some sense. And it's not in the gold, it's in the forest, it's in other places. I'm wondering if it's a meaningful analogy, because I'm sure that in the lead up to having such a centralized amount of gold in a bank required technology to get there, or protections, security. And this is essentially what you're talking about, is decentralized security in some sense. I'd love to hear any other perspective around decentralization and participation.
Okay, as you might suspect, and you brought up some points that the central banks think very deeply about, because we're all wrestling with the idea, what does a digital sovereign currency look like? And the Bank of England has been thinking about this quite a bit. There's some great papers on there. The Riksbank, Singaporean Monetary Authority of Singapore, and we're trying to understand what are we trying to solve for? If we digitize fiat currency, do we create more risks? But some of the risks you talked about, even on a blockchain, you would have to create, or something that's a substitute. That's the idea of a blockchain. You need, if you're going to do distributed with a fiat currency, it's going to have to be trusted distributed people. You couldn't just leave it open to miners around the world. You might have, every central bank has a verifier or a validator within it, the OECD, the IMF, so you have distributed, but it's a closed distributed group. So there's been huge discussions around this. Getting to our point around nature, and exactly to your point, if a blockchain goes out of business, if the coin goes to zero, and again, just as a quick central banker point of view, what gives currency value is generally three things. One is faith in that government in and of itself. If it's a disreputable government, it's not going to have it. But they've got two other big things. They can tax, and they can also issue bonds. And so a currency's got to have real, some ways of propping that value up. And I keep coming to value, and I'm going to get back to tech in a moment, but one way to maybe think about natural capital and how you really evaluate it, and then how do we can put that into technology, into coins. If you think of all the free riding negative externalities, I know that's a real central banker term, all that means is bad stuff. So if you're a manufacturer of cars and both your product emits carbon but also your manufacturing process does, but you don't include the cost of that carbon in the cost of your automobile, it's a free rider. It's a negative externality. It's bad stuff, but it doesn't get captured. Well, when you start taking apart nature, you get pandemics, you get flooding, you get all kinds of things that, by the way, can be quantified through insurance companies or through the cost of healthcare systems. So you're trying to figure out how much is nature worth. Well, I can bloody well start telling you when you start looking at the cost of Hurricane Sandy or the cost of the pandemic globally, because that's what it comes down to. So you want to start putting a cost on nature. We can do that. Now I'm going to hand it back to my tech friends, and because I can start talking to Munich Re and Swiss Re, who will give you the numbers, and we can break that down by forests, mangroves, all types of natural capital, and you figure out, all right, the free riding negative externalities for this year were this. The nature that's keeping those from being bigger are that. And every year, that's the value. And to keep those forests going, you need to start paying for that. And here's a quantitative price of it. And I'm now going to hand back to my tech friends over here who can talk about how you take the value of those free riding negative externalities, create them into a token in which those people that are causing that damage, and in this case, it's not a manufacturer, it could be a private sector stakeholder, or it could be a sovereign. Back to tech.
Thank you, and any other perspective around decentralization? Go for it. Please.
So again, I'm here from a different perspective, and when I think of decentralization, one of the things that immediately comes to mind is the fact that, of course, all of the different natural assets that we're trying to, or that we want to tokenize at some point, are, by their very nature, extraordinarily distributed. There are distributed trees and forests and animals, and one of the core challenges that we have currently in driving forward investment into delivering on positive impacts is that it's so costly to actually do the impact assessment, to go out into these environments and landscapes and really get to those assessments of value. On a macroeconomic perspective level, sure, you can look at what this is costing in terms of insurance, et cetera, but I do have to say that there are huge error margins there if you start to consider, what is the value? We may be looking at the value of water to a human population for drinking and for bathing and for agriculture, but we're not necessarily considering the value of that to the ecosystem around that particular body of water. Sorry, flies here. And so there are definitely big error margins in how those valuations are done. And I know that that's not the point of this discussion, but where it links back to decentralization is a kind of point around how to create decentralized verification of sources of truth, and how does that connect best to the tech is kind of also a question for the panel. Because one thing I've been thinking a lot of is, with satellite imagery and remote sensing, you can certainly start to capture all sorts of information about, is there really a forest there? Is there a tree there? How healthy is that tree? Is there an algal bloom, et cetera? And you can start then really creating sources of truth that are verified as long as they're not manipulable. And this is more of a question to the tech people on this panel. How does that fit best with the different types of DLT systems that are out there? Is that something that's best done in something like a blockchain or in a different sort of DLT system? Or is it best to have central verification because you can't have, you shouldn't have like manipulation of that information, because it's very easy to manipulate satellite imagery as well. So anyway, more of a question to the group.
Yeah, and just to remind ourselves, like, nature is very important, but there's a lot of work in the decarbonization and the energy transition space that deal with like renewable energy. Is the power plant open? Is it actually working? Is the solar actually operating? So there's a whole range of applications. I love the importance of decentralization and the participation, verification. This mic hates me. Yannis, for you to bring like that angle around data in participation.
A couple of points. You mentioned, I'm not against blockchain. As I said, blockchain does whatever it does well up to a certain point, and then it may not be good. The current cryptocurrencies, which gave birth, if you want, to the blockchain, and the process of mining the cryptocurrencies, especially Bitcoin, is something that I don't see as a layman, not an economist, as a layman, something that will get us where we want. We may need more different instruments, different digital assets to achieve that, always decentralized, and for the reasons that I explained before. The second thing is, you mentioned interoperability. Data has to be open, we discussed this. It also has to be an acronym called FAIR: findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And more or less, most of these four elements are transferable to the kind of data that we need and to the kind of assets that we need here. They have to be interoperable. You ask, how do the various assets interoperate? If each one is in a different world, then we don't have a global economy, which we need in order to address the global elements that we have nature, because we don't have nature doesn't have political barriers or financial barriers. How do we do that? We have to set up the infrastructure in a way that addresses this issue. And we don't know how to do that yet. I think it's something that we need to sit down and come up with solutions. It's not rocket science, but it's not science that we already have in our bags. And the last thing, I wanted, you all talk about monetizing nature, which makes perfect sense. But if I may dare to go out of my waters here and say, there are also principles that are monetizable. And a few years back, I'm from the Department of Computer Science, University of Athens. She's an environmental microeconomist. And we collaborate very, very well. I'm the digital, she's the green or the sustainable, however you want to call it. We wanted to capture the impact of open access. Openness, what is the impact of open access? And Phoebe did her magic and she was able to monetize, let me put the monetize in quotes because, again, I may not be using the term right. She was able to monetize openness and show that it makes even financial sense to be open. And at least the primary impact that it has, secondary in the economy and innovation, is still another more difficult problem to do. But even this can be monetized, and next to the monetizing nature, by monetizing certain principles that have to be part of our work. I think it's something that for me as a technologist excites me. And
well, it's true. Public goods are crucial for the efficient working of our economic and social systems. Nature, in some parts, is a public good. Information, in some parts, is a public good. Innovation, in some parts, is a public good. They have public elements. Why? Because they create effects that increase or decrease the welfare of those that are not directly involved in producing or consuming them. So we have actually a paper that showcases that in the last 50 years, all the investments that have been implemented on European soil, large-scale investments, the biggest part of the value of these investments is at the end of the day public. They affect nature, they affect human capital, they create multipliers of growth due to innovation, and this creates jobs, and all this increase social welfare. So it is quite crucial to understand how private investments turn out to create multiplier effects on economic growth and jobs and job numbers, and in this way help us have the capacity to get on a sustainable pathway. The difficulties are the following. As being someone that works for measuring SDGs across the world, measuring the performance of 193 countries against the SDGs, I can tell you that a big bunch of data is not available, is not open access. A lot of data is not assessed, is not properly monitored, is not verified, is not transparent. And at the end of the day, the global south misses a lot of the crucial data that we need to make sense, to make a global sense of our performance against the sustainability pathway. So we need to invest more in data, in transparency and accuracy of data, and also in terms of creating consistent standards which will allow decentralization. Because the decentralization makes sense if you're measuring in different geospatial and time spaces the same thing.
Right.
You have the ability to have a common framework of measuring, a consistent framework of measuring so that you can compare. So we need a lot of investment on data and a lot of investment in standardizing the way we use data in order to make meaningful comparisons and articulate the optimal mixture of investments and the optimal transformation of value chains in order to get to sustainable growth.
Thank you, Phoebe, and you brought a very important point, which is that the Global South perspective into this. We have a couple of minutes to wrap up, and I'm going to prompt you with a couple of options. You probably can't talk about a lot of them. What are the things that are, we've talked about a lot of things, decentralization, a lot of the building blocks, reimagining value. We are in an inflection point of opportunity, and we're also facing an existential crisis as a humanity. What are the things that excite you the most about what we can do now that we couldn't do before with technology and with
to mobilize mindsets, to redefine value? Or what are the bottlenecks that are so important that we need to get right for us to move forward? And three, what is missing? How can this go wrong? Because you start talking about it, monetizing nature also sounds like we could be trying to solve the problem with the same mindset that initiates it. How do we ensure that this transition is revolutionary, it's fast, but it's also equitable? So I'd love to hear either on what excites you, what are the bottlenecks that we need to survent, and what are the things that could go wrong that we really need to pay attention to? And open just to, you got maybe 1 minute each.
Okay, in 1 minute or less, what excites me most about this discussion is how technology can drive transparency, and that's the heart of everything. Whether you're trying to understand what's really quantifying value, whether it's a carbon credit, nature, technology allows you to take a look at, is it a high integrity analysis? We talked about spatial oversight of both nature and understanding it. Through technology, transparency becomes available, data becomes available, and being able to do that allows you to actually look at where the negative externalities are, where they're not capturing it, and we're able to properly build markets to protect nature and protect things and move it forward. So transparency and technology excite me.
Thank you. There's a lot about this that excites me. I think this opens a huge realm of possibilities for speeding up impact assessment, greasing the wheels of investment into the right areas to really drive forward mitigation of impacts and adaptation. But I do have this concern that I've already raised a couple of times around monetizing nature from an ethical standpoint. I think that that's a very challenging thing to do. You run into a lot of issues. Who decides what the value is of different assets? And I think that there are ways to solve this, where the technology can still work, but perhaps we have geo-fenced valuations of certain types of assets, and that can also be done on a global scale, or other ways of really keeping certain types of values only exchangeable with one another. So a multi-value currency system, for example, where things are not brought to a common denominator. So I think that this community with a lot of really smart people can crack these challenges, but I do think that that's an important challenge to tackle as we move forward.
What excites me is that the data technology that I've been working on for the past 30, 40 years, whatever, is now in the service of really having an impact worldwide for something that is very critical. And this requires collaboration, like the one I have with Phoebe or with wherever else. And that's the most exciting part of my work. What frustrates me is that most of the people that think of the big problems assume that technology is a given, it's free, we just use it, and they don't monetize the need of that technology, and that is an uphill battle for people to say that you need a little bit part of investment to invest in technology, otherwise you won't get anywhere. And what is missing is data. We have data, but we don't have it in the right way, in an open way, and in a way that is quality data. Because data you can have, but it can be missing, it can be wrong, it can be muddled, so that they don't give you the right picture. This is missing, and we need to have the mechanisms which are technology enabled, but beyond just technology, on having the right data. I think we are missing.
Thank you. The
Keep it short.
I'll
Thanks.
keep it short. I'm super excited because I see all the technology pieces coming together. We've been through a couple of cycles, a couple of generations of the decentralized technology. The technologies that need to be brought to bear to solve these problems are almost in place. I'm seeing it on a day-to-day basis. We're making partnerships, we're investing, we're providing grants, the end-to-end value chain for doing this. And it's not monetization of data. I believe it's the valorization of data, the attribution of value. And when you value something, you avoid the tragedy of commons. So I think there's a distinction there. But I'm an eternal optimist. I think we're on that inflection point for really big things.
Oh, amazing. Phoebe, closing remarks.
Quickly, 2 points. I understand the worries about monetizing nature, but I can tell you, since I spent my life on this, that this is the most human-centric part of economics. The value derives from human preferences. In closing, and on a different point, I would like to say this. It is crucial in this data trip to empower the global south to become a powerful partner. Because without their data, without their digitalization, without their involvement in the transformation, we cannot solve the climate problem, the biodiversity collapse problem, and the huge increase in inequality problem that seems to be leading us to continuous crisis across the world.
Amazing. Thank you, Phoebe. Please join us for a round of applause to an amazing panelist and an exciting conversation. Oh, yes, let's take a picture. Thank you. We stand up or the